What if everything you thought you knew about Massachusetts' founding fathers was just the tip of the iceberg? A revolutionary genetic study has shattered our understanding of who really built the Bay State. We're talking about DNA evidence that rewrites American colonial history, Viking settlements appearing centuries before the Mayflower, African lineages weaving through fishing communities long before slavery, Portuguese whalers, French trappers, and mysterious Celtic seafarers, all leaving genetic fingerprints that challenge every textbook account of Massachusetts' origins. This groundbreaking research reveals how the Bay State became America's original melting pot, where cultures collided and combined centuries before Ellis Island ever opened its doors. From Nantucket whaling crews carrying Polynesian DNA to Boston Irish families with hidden Native American ancestry, genetic time capsules have been hiding in plain sight across the Commonwealth. Celtic warriors, Basque fishermen, and even North African traders. Their genetic legacy lives on in modern Massachusetts families who never knew their true heritage. Why Massachusetts DNA tells America's hidden story. Massachusetts occupies one of North America's most strategic positions for understanding human migration patterns. Positioned at the intersection of major ocean currents, river systems, and continental pathways, the Commonwealth served as a natural gateway for multiple waves of human movement spanning millennia. Cape Cod's distinctive geography created isolated populations that preserved ancient genetic signatures, while Boston Harbor's deep waters attracted maritime peoples from across the Atlantic. Geographic isolation played a crucial role in preserving rare genetic lineages. Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket developed unique population genetics due to their island nature, while the Berkshire Mountains created separate genetic pools in western Massachusetts. Unlike regions with continuous population mixing, Massachusetts' varied geography allowed distinct genetic signatures to survive and amplify over centuries. Multiple migration waves left distinct DNA fingerprints across the Commonwealth, from Paleo-Indian hunters to woodland period farmers, from medieval European explorers to Industrial Revolution immigrants. Each group added layers to Massachusetts' genetic story. Economic opportunities, fishing, whaling, manufacturing, and education repeatedly drew diverse populations to the region, creating one of America's most complex genetic landscapes. Before we dive into these mind-blowing discoveries, let us know in the comments, what Massachusetts town are you from, and what genetic secrets do you think might be hiding in your family tree? Revolutionary research unveils hidden heritage. A collaboration between Harvard Medical School, MIT, University of Massachusetts, and tribal nations has produced the most comprehensive genetic survey ever conducted in the Bay State. Indigenous communities guided every aspect of the study, ensuring cultural protocols were respected while maintaining sovereignty over their genetic information. This wasn't typical academic research conducted in isolation. It represented genuine partnership between scientific institutions and affected communities. Research teams collected DNA samples from over 30,000 Massachusetts residents, representing every county from Berkshire to Barnstable. Participants included members of all federally recognized tribes, descendants of Mayflower passengers, Irish famine survivors, Italian immigrants, Portuguese fishermen, and recent arrivals from every continent. Urban Boston provided samples from one of America's most diverse cities, while rural communities offered genetic windows into centuries-old settlement patterns. Cutting-edge methodology broke new ground in several areas. Scientists employed ancient DNA analysis techniques previously used only in archaeological contexts, mitochondrial sequencing to trace maternal lineages across centuries, and Y chromosome analysis to track paternal heritage. Computational methods identified ghost populations, groups that left genetic signatures but no historical records. Integration of genetic data with oral histories, archaeological evidence, and genealogical records created a three-dimensional picture of Massachusetts' human story. Ancient foundations that predate Plymouth Rock. Everyone knows the story of 1620 and Plymouth Rock, But genetic evidence reveals a far more complex narrative stretching back 12 millennia. Native American populations in Massachusetts represented not one people, but multiple distinct lineages with different origins and migration histories that challenge oversimplified textbook accounts. DNA analysis identified genetic markers from at least 5 different indigenous source populations. Wampanoag peoples showed connections to Great Lakes tribes, suggesting ancient migration routes through interior waterways. Massachusetts populations carried genetic signatures linking them to southeastern tribes, while Nipmuc DNA revealed connections to northern woodlands peoples. These weren't random migrations, but organized movements following seasonal patterns and trade networks. Perhaps most surprising was evidence of pre-Columbian contact between Massachusetts tribes and distant populations. Genetic markers characteristic of Pacific Northwest tribes appeared in coastal Massachusetts groups, indicating extensive trade networks crossing the continent. Some genetic signatures suggested contact with Arctic peoples, possibly through seasonal hunting expeditions or intertribal marriages that created genetic connections spanning thousands of miles. Ghost populations left their mark in Massachusetts DNA, extinct tribal groups that contributed significantly to modern genetics, but vanished from historical records. These phantom populations survived only in genetic form, making Massachusetts a refuge for lost indigenous lineages. Their DNA tells stories of displacement, survival, and cultural continuity that oral histories and archaeological evidence alone could never reveal. Viking genetic bombshell predates all European contact. Here's where the study gets truly shocking. Scandinavian genetic markers appeared in Massachusetts coastal populations, with dates suggesting arrival over 400 years before the Mayflower landed at Plymouth. This discovery has sent shockwaves through the archaeological community and fundamentally challenges assumptions about pre-Columbian European contact. Cape Cod emerged as the epicenter of Viking genetic influence. Fishing communities from Provincetown to Chatham showed remarkably high frequencies of Norse genetic markers, particularly those matching populations from western Norway and Iceland. Dating analysis suggests these genetic signatures arrived during the medieval period, coinciding with known Viking expansion into North America, but extending much further south than previously documented. Alternative explanations prove equally fascinating. Some Scandinavian genetics might have reached Massachusetts through complex migration routes involving Greenland, Labrador, and maritime Canada. Seasonal fishing expeditions could have brought Norse explorers into Massachusetts waters for decades or centuries without leaving archaeological evidence. Climate patterns during the medieval warm period would have made such voyages more feasible, with ice-free passages and favorable ocean currents. Cultural evidence supports genetic findings. Traditional Wampanoag stories describe encounters with pale strangers from the sunrise direction who arrived in great canoes with white wings. These accounts, previously dismissed as post-contact myth-making, now align remarkably well with genetic timelines. Some Cape Cod place names show possible Norse linguistic influences, suggesting sustained contact rather than brief encounters. Hidden African heritage reshapes. Colonial understanding. Massachusetts's African genetic heritage extends far beyond the colonial slave trade, revealing connections that predate English settlement and challenge conventional historical narratives. West African genetic markers appeared in coastal communities with dates suggesting arrival during the early 16th century, coinciding with Portuguese and Spanish exploration rather than later English colonization. North African genetics provided additional surprises. Moorish genetic signatures appeared in Massachusetts fishing communities, likely arriving through Portuguese intermediaries, who maintained extensive North African contacts. These genetics were strongest in communities with histories of whaling and deep-sea fishing, suggesting maritime connections that brought African sailors and traders to Massachusetts waters centuries before recorded history documents such contact. Portuguese connections proved crucial for understanding African genetic pathways. Portuguese explorers and traders maintained extensive African networks, often bringing African crew members, interpreters, and specialists on Atlantic voyages. Some of these individuals apparently remained in Massachusetts, intermarrying with Native American populations and creating genetic lineages that survived through the colonial period despite historical erasure. Regional patterns revealed fascinating insights. Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket showed particularly strong African genetic signatures, likely reflecting their roles as whaling centers where maritime cultures from around the Atlantic converged. Mainland fishing communities from Gloucester to New Bedford carried similar genetic markers, indicating widespread maritime connections that brought African genetics to Massachusetts long before the Triangle trade. Unexpected European tapestry weaves. Complex origins. Massachusetts's European genetic heritage proves far more complex than Mayflower mythology suggests. Spanish, French, and Portuguese DNA appeared with dates predating English colonization, indicating that Massachusetts attracted European attention long before the Pilgrims arrived. These early European genetics created a foundation that later English settlement built upon rather than originated. Basque whalers left clear genetic signatures along the Massachusetts coast. These maritime specialists from the Pyrenees had been hunting whales in North Atlantic waters for centuries, apparently using Massachusetts harbors as seasonal bases. Genetic evidence suggests some Basque whalers established permanent relationships with Native American communities, creating genetic lineages that persisted through the colonial period and beyond. Celtic connections appeared centuries before mass Irish immigration. Scottish and Irish genetic markers in Massachusetts populations dated to the medieval period, possibly arriving through Viking networks or independent Celtic seafaring expeditions. These early Celtic genetics were strongest in western Massachusetts, suggesting inland settlement patterns that differed from later coastal immigration. Mediterranean genetics added another layer of complexity. Italian and Greek genetic markers appeared in unexpected locations and time periods, possibly representing early maritime connections or skilled craftsmen who arrived during the colonial period. Some of these Mediterranean genetics were associated with specific trades, shipbuilding, stonework, and metallurgy, suggesting that skilled European craftsmen were recruited for Massachusetts development projects. Revolutionary War genetics reveal hidden alliances. Massachusetts' role as the birthplace of American independence created genetic patterns that historians never fully understood until now. DNA analysis reveals a far more complex picture of who actually fought for American freedom. Continental Army units stationed in Massachusetts included soldiers from unexpected backgrounds, African Americans, Native Americans, and recent European immigrants who joined the cause despite having no established ties to the colonies. German mercenaries who switched sides during the war left surprising genetic signatures throughout Massachusetts. Rather than returning to Europe after the conflict, many Hessian soldiers settled permanently in Massachusetts communities, intermarrying with local families and creating German genetic lineages that persisted for generations. French military advisors and volunteers who supported the American cause also contributed unexpected genetics, establishing businesses and families that created lasting genetic connections between Massachusetts and France. Irish immigration during the 1840s potato famine fundamentally altered Massachusetts genetics. Entire regions shifted from predominantly English genetic signatures to Irish-dominated populations within a single generation. Genetic analysis reveals that Irish immigrants didn't just add to existing populations. They completely transformed the genetic landscape of cities like Boston, Worcester, and Springfield. French-Canadian migration created a genetic corridor from Quebec to Massachusetts mill towns. These populations brought unique genetic signatures, combining French colonial, Native American, and other European lineages. French-Canadian genetics were particularly strong in communities along the Connecticut River Valley, where textile mills drew workers from throughout New England and eastern Canada. Unexpected immigrant populations added surprising genetic diversity. Chinese genetics appeared in Massachusetts during the mid-19th century, concentrated in Boston and associated with maritime trade rather than Western railroad construction. Middle Eastern genetics, particularly Lebanese and Syrian, appeared in communities with textile and trading connections. Even South American genetics, likely representing skilled workers or traders, appeared in Massachusetts' industrial centers. Industrial Revolution, genetic explosion. Massachusetts' 19th century transformation into America's industrial powerhouse created unprecedented genetic diversification. Mill towns from Lowell to Fall River became genetic crossroads where European, American, and international populations converged to create new genetic combinations that reflected the state's economic dynamism. Irish immigration during the 1840s potato famine fundamentally altered Massachusetts genetics. Entire regions shifted from predominantly English genetic signatures to Irish-dominated populations within a single generation. Genetic analysis reveals that Irish immigrants didn't just add to existing populations, they completely transformed the genetic landscape of cities like Boston, Worcester, and Springfield. French-Canadian migration created a genetic corridor from Quebec to Massachusetts mill towns. These populations brought unique genetic signatures combining French colonial, Native American, and other European lineages. French-Canadian genetics were particularly strong in communities along the Connecticut River Valley, where textile mills drew workers from throughout New England and eastern Canada. Unexpected immigrant populations added surprising genetic diversity. Chinese genetics appeared in Massachusetts during the mid-19th century, concentrated in Boston and associated with maritime trade rather than Western railroad construction. Middle Eastern genetics, particularly Lebanese and Syrian, appeared in communities with textile and trading connections. Even South American genetics, likely representing skilled workers or traders, appeared in Massachusetts' industrial centers. Modern genetic revolution continues. Massachusetts' role as an educational and technological hub drove continued genetic diversification through the 20th and 21st centuries. Universities attracted international students and faculty, creating new genetic combinations that reflected global intellectual networks. Technology companies brought employees from around the world, adding contemporary layers to Massachusetts' genetic complexity. Portuguese immigration, particularly from the Azores and Cape Verde, created substantial genetic influence in southeastern Massachusetts. These populations brought unique Atlantic Island genetics that combined Portuguese, African, and other influences. Communities from New Bedford to Provincetown developed distinctive genetic signatures reflecting centuries of Portuguese maritime culture. Italian immigration peaked during the early 20th century, creating genetic neighborhoods that persisted for generations. Boston's North End, Worcester's Shrewsbury Street, and numerous smaller communities developed Italian genetic concentrations that maintained distinct characteristics despite broader population mixing. Contemporary immigration continues adding genetic diversity. Recent Asian populations, Chinese, Indian, Korean, and Southeast Asian, represent the latest chapter in Massachusetts' genetic story. Latin American genetics, particularly from Central and South America, appear in communities throughout the state. African immigrants from various regions add new genetic diversity that differs from earlier African American patterns. What this changes about American history. These discoveries force a complete reconsideration of American colonial history. Massachusetts emerges not as an English religious refuge, but as a complex multicultural society that developed over centuries through interactions between Native Americans, Europeans, Africans, and others. Genetic evidence suggests that by 1620, Massachusetts already hosted one of North America's most diverse populations. Pre-Columbian contact was far more extensive than previously imagined. Viking genetics appearing 400 years before the Mayflower, African lineages predating slavery, and complex Native American networks indicate that Massachusetts participated in global connections centuries before recorded history documents such contact. These findings suggest that isolation was the exception, not the rule, in pre-colonial America. Indigenous sovereignty arguments gained powerful scientific support. genetic evidence of continuous Native American presence for 12 millennia strengthens tribal claims and cultural rights. Archaeological sites, previously dismissed as too old, now gain credibility from genetic timelines that support extended indigenous presence and sophisticated pre-contact societies. Colonial period narratives require fundamental revision. Massachusetts developed through interactions between existing diverse populations rather than English colonization of empty territory. Genetic mixing patterns suggest that colonial society was far more integrated than historical records indicate, with intermarriage and cultural exchange, creating truly mixed communities. Technology behind these discoveries. Ancient DNA analysis has revolutionized our understanding of population genetics. Scientists can now extract genetic material from samples hundreds of years old, including hair, teeth, and even soil samples from historical sites. Advanced purification techniques isolate tiny amounts of human DNA from samples contaminated with bacterial and environmental genetic material. Computational power drives much of this genetic revolution. Analyzing DNA data from 30,000 individuals requires supercomputers capable of processing billions of genetic markers and identifying patterns invisible to human analysis. Machine learning algorithms detect genetic signatures from extinct populations and trace migration routes across continents and centuries. Indigenous collaboration shaped both the ethics and effectiveness of this research. Community members provided crucial context for genetic findings through oral histories and traditional knowledge. This partnership approach ensures that research serves community interests while advancing scientific understanding of human migration and cultural development. Preservation techniques create genetic archives for future research. Biobanks store genetic material indefinitely, ensuring that today's samples will enable discoveries not yet possible with current technology. These preserved samples represent Massachusetts's genetic heritage for future generations of researchers and community members. Future research directions. Phase 2. Research is already expanding to underrepresented communities and regions not included in the initial study. Rural communities, recent immigrant populations, and specific ethnic groups will provide additional genetic data to complete Massachusetts's genetic map. This expanded research will reveal even more complexity in the state's genetic heritage. Archaeological integration represents the next frontier. With permission from tribal nations and following strict cultural protocols, researchers plan to analyze genetic material from Massachusetts historical sites. This work could bridge gaps between modern genetic profiles and ancient populations, revealing continuity or replacement patterns across centuries. Medical applications could transform healthcare in Massachusetts. Understanding population genetics helps predict disease susceptibility, drug responses, and health risks specific to Massachusetts populations. This personalized medicine approach could address health disparities while improving outcomes for communities with unique genetic profiles. Cultural preservation efforts integrate genetic findings with language revitalization and traditional knowledge programs. Communities are using genetic evidence to strengthen cultural practices and maintain traditions that genetic analysis proves have deep historical roots. This work honors both scientific discovery and cultural continuity. Massachusetts as America's genetic crossroads. Massachusetts genetics illuminate the true complexity of American origins. Rather than simple colonial narratives, genetic evidence reveals Massachusetts as a meeting place where cultures from 6 continents converged, mixed, and created something entirely new. This genetic diversity represents strength, resilience, and adaptation that enabled Massachusetts to become a leader in education, technology, and innovation. Modern Massachusetts families carry genetic legacies they never imagined. Irish surnames might conceal Native American ancestry, Portuguese families might carry African genetics, and Yankee lineages might include medieval Viking heritage. These genetic connections remind us that human history is far more interconnected than political boundaries suggest. cultural richness reflected in Massachusetts genetics demonstrates that diversity has always been the state's strength. From Paleo-Indian hunters to modern tech workers, each population brought skills, knowledge, and genetic heritage that contributed to Massachusetts' development. This genetic story challenges myths of ethnic purity while celebrating the complex reality of human heritage. Massachusetts isn't just the birthplace of American liberty, it's the genetic birthplace of American diversity. These discoveries prove that the real founding fathers and mothers of the Bay State came from every corner of the globe, centuries before we ever imagined. Hidden in modern DNA, their genetic signatures tell stories of courage, adaptation, and survival that shaped not just Massachusetts, but all of America. Genetic analysis reveals that Massachusetts has always been what America aspires to be, a place where different peoples come together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. This scientific evidence proves that diversity isn't a modern challenge, but an ancient strength that built the foundation for everything Massachusetts has achieved. If you're fascinated by science that rewrites history and reveals hidden human connections, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're uncovering the genetic secrets of cities and regions around the world, and trust me, you won't want to miss what we discover next. Drop a comment about which state or region you'd like us to investigate next. Your genetic story might be more surprising than you think.